Hey y'all, welcome back to another doll customizing video. Today we're going to be working on a purple crystal fairy. So if you haven't seen my doll customizing videos before, I've been working on a series of rainbow fairies where each color also corresponds to something in nature that is that color, because why would I ever have just a simple concept for anything? So the example that I always use as the red fairy was also the red berry fairy because a lot of berries are red. And so now we are all the way on purple. We are almost done with this series, which is so weird to think about, but also it has taken me so long. Like, it feels like it's been quick for me, but I know that it's taken me a long time. Anyway, we are on to purple, which is the crystal fairy. I know that crystals come in all kinds of different colors, but I just thought the crystals would be really cool to do for one of the fairies, and I needed something for purple, and so the purple crystal fairy, at least the concept, was born. And you guys, way back when I was making the concept art for these on Instagram, you guys seemed really excited about the purple crystal fairy specifically. I do think that they look really cool. I think that the idea is awesome. The execution might be kind of tricky, but we're in this together. Wow. I sounded so happy and so excited. Hi! So, I'm interrupting this video right at the beginning because that intro is no longer really accurate to how this video is gonna go. I filmed it and then started working on the purple fairy as I explained, and things didn't go as planned. I guess this is kind of a spoiler, but I'm not going to finish the fairy in this video. I'm going to have like a redemption video. I'm already working on her again, but where this video leaves off is not at a great place. I tried a lot of different things, I tried a lot of different techniques, and I think that I learned a lot through the course of making this video, but I tried so many different things that it was getting to the point where it was going to be so long if I kept waiting until I finally could finish the fairy. Like, I'm not even actually done with her still, so I don't know how long it's going to be. But this is going to be a rough one. There's going to be a lot of mistakes, and the ending is going to be a really big mistake. The ending is going to be like, this is what we have to work with, because it gets to a point, I'm just spoiling everything for you, sorry, but it does get to a point where I literally have to almost restart the whole doll. So yeah, this is going to be kind of a rough one, kind of a more lesson learning type video. So if that's interesting to you, definitely feel free to keep watching and kind of enjoy my suffering. I do think that there was purpose to it, because like, I think that there's value in showing that things don't always work, so that if anyone is watching this and wants to try similar stuff, they know what not to try. But then also I think that it's good to show that when you're making artistic things in any medium, obviously I'm doing dolls here, but in any medium, there's no guarantee that it's going to go perfect on the first time, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, it can be an opportunity for learning, and even if you don't learn anything, you can still try again. So I think that there's value in still putting this video out without having the happy ending. Yeah, it's just gonna be a little bit rougher than what me in the past was expecting, but we're gonna get through this one. If you want to join me on this bumpy patch in the ride to making the purple fairy, and I promise at some point in the future she's going to have a redemption and we're gonna make her. But on that more positive note, let's get into what didn't work.
I decided to use a Melody Piper doll from Ever After High as the base for the purple fairy. As always, the first step is to remove the doll's head. After that, I had to get rid of the factory hair. I started off externally with scissors, cutting as close to the scalp as possible. Once they were rocking a very messy buzz cut, I started to remove their remaining hair plugs through the neck hole. Or tried to. I used a sculpting tool to scrape the inside of their head to try to loosen the glue, following that with tweezers to remove the hair. I did that for a long while and was encountering a lot more resistance than normal. So, since I was already planning on making a wig rather than doing a reroot for this doll, I sliced into the vinyl of their scalp to take the hair out of that way. Turns out there were two reasons I was having such trouble. The first was that there were a few really big, really solid chunks of glue and hair that simply wouldn't have fit through the neck hole. The second was that this was easily the stickiest, nastiest doll head I have ever encountered. So instead of being satisfying like normal, this step was absolutely disgusting. But after a lot of perseverance, their head was finally nice and bald. And the last thing to remove is their face. I used 100% pure acetone nail polish remover to take off the factory face paint. I used just a paper towel for the bigger, flatter portions, and then used a Q-tip to get into the tighter crevices. I didn't film it, but I also used acetone to remove the tattoo on their leg. Immediately after, I washed the face and body with warm, soapy water very thoroughly. This is important to do on the head, but especially important to do on the body because the acetone can eat away at the plastic. Then it was time to rejoin the head and body. Shockingly, yes. With the plans that I had for the Purple Fairy, I didn't need to keep the head and body separate any longer. Those of you who have seen my previous doll customizing videos can probably guess that this was a huge relief to me because I do have a tendency to break the ears of my dolls when I put them back together. To really make the doll whole again, I used Loctite glue to seal the cut I had made in their scalp. Things are going pretty smooth thus far, so y'all are probably wondering why I sounded so grim in the intro. I promise you things will rapidly decline not long hereafter. The next step in making this custom was to create a wig cap. I've only done one custom doll where I didn't do a reroute, and that was for my orange fairy Roar. For him, I created wefts out of nylon doll hair and glued them straight to his head. And while I think the end result turned out okay for display, it was by no means a neat or technically solid job. So this time I tried to make a wig cap in the hopes that it would be easier. I started off by wrapping the doll's head in cling film and securing it with a rubber band. I tried to prevent bumps as best as I could to keep the working surface smooth. I know this looks absolutely horrific, but this is to protect the doll's head from getting glue on it while making the cap. Then I did the same thing with some stretchy scrap fabric I already had. Usually you want to pick the thinnest fabric possible for a wig cap, but since I already had this, I wanted to at least try to use it so that it didn't go to waste. I secured the fabric with another rubber band around the face this time and spent a lot of effort trying to eliminate any wrinkles to the best of my ability. Since the fabric is actually what the hair will be glued onto, it's important to have as smooth a surface as possible. Once I was satisfied, I busted out the Mod Podge. Using a brush, I applied a thin layer of the glue all over the fabric from the crown of their head to the point where the rubber band was wrapped around them. This is the part of the fabric that will actually become the wig cap. I was extra careful to make sure the glue soaked into the fabric and that every bit that needed to be covered was covered. Once the first layer was done, I left them to dry and then did 2 more layers off camera. The next day I came back and the fabric had turned into a nice hard helmet. It was actually so satisfying to peel this off the doll. Then I simply cut the extra fabric off, starting off not cutting too much off and going further and further as I went. I knew I could always cut more off, but I could not easily add more back on. I tested the fit on the doll's head, and the only thing left to do was cut a little bit of extra room for their ears. I knew I would need a little bit more wiggle room in sculpting, so I cut out some rough half circles of the wig cap to avoid fit complications with the bigger ears later on. Then it was hair time, and this is where things started to get kind of dicey. I bought pre-made purple wefts to use on the Purple Fairy, and I think I'm just bad at using wefts. I cut them to size and tried to use Mod Podge to glue them onto the wig cap. As you can see from the footage, literally from the first weft, I was having trouble getting them to stick. But little by little, I managed to glue roughly a full head of hair onto this doll. The second problem came in the way the wefts were crafted. Basically, instead of the hair being even in length from the root of the weft, where the hair is sewn together to the end, there were 2 lengths. Most of the hair was very long, but there were some really short hairs at the weft root that caused me a lot of grief. Because of how short they were, I couldn't manipulate them or flip the wefts to make a nice, neat parting line. So this is what I ended up with. I figured I had plans to make a headpiece anyway, so the visible weft roots would be covered in the end. I knew I wanted the Purple Fairy to have shorter hair than the length of the wefts, so I tied up the ends and made a very rough cut. I was planning to try to curl the hair, so I wanted to do that before cutting the hair into a neater style. Then I made what turned out to be a major mistake. I got the hair wet. I didn't use hot water because I figured hot water would be a bad idea with the Mod Podge, but I did get it wet without checking to be sure that that was safe. And as it turns out, it wasn't. I wet the hair and curled it, and at first it was just one piece that came off. Then it was more and more until I was left with a bunch of glue-covered hair that was no longer attached to the wig cap. Even if I had had enough wefts left over to try again, I wouldn't have wanted to. So instead I decided I would use yarn. I cut a bunch of lengths of purple yarn twice as long as I thought I would need them to be, and then I started to unravel them. The yarn I used was made of 4 individual strands twisted together, so when I unraveled them, I would get 4 strands that had a nice curly texture that I could use for hair. It's not the texture I had in mind when I made my concept art, but I do think it's really pretty, so this is what I went with. I took a few strands at a time, added some hot glue to the wig cap, which thankfully was still intact, and glued them on at the halfway point. Basically, I was doing the glue version of rerouting. I actually got the idea from watching Mitzi Fritzy on TikTok make her goblin sculptures. I'll have her account linked in the description box for you guys to check out because she's truly an amazing artist. And I will say, I didn't like how I got to this point, but I loved this process so much. I think I'm going to be doing this for a lot of dolls in the future. I think the textures yarn can give are so beautiful, and something about the process is so unbelievably satisfying. I can wholeheartedly say making this wig the second time around was the most fun I've had doll customizing yet, so I definitely want to do it again. And it looks so good once it's done. That meant I could finally turn my attention away from their hair and onto their ears. Just like always, I used epoxy sculpt to create some fairy ears. I mixed equal parts of A and B together and then just got to what is, for me, the painful process of sculpting. I've mentioned this before, but I've never been very good at sculpting things. I do think I'm making some improvements as I practice, but the more I practice, the more I realize that I'm not a super big fan of how epoxy works. I still have so much, so that's why I ended up using it to make the ears for this doll, but I do want to experiment with different mediums in the future just because I think that a different kind of sculpting medium might make the process more enjoyable for me. My personal feelings aside, I did manage to make some ears. I also changed the bridge of my fairy's nose. It didn't turn out exactly as I had imagined, as I had kind of been aiming for a more prominent nose, but as it is, I pretty much just flattened out their bridge. Still, for my first time sculpting a nose, I feel like it could have been a lot worse. Of course, I couldn't just leave the epoxy colored, so I painted the ears and nose to match the rest of the doll's skin. That led right into the face-up. I started off by laying down some pastels as blush, and then went in with white to define the shape of their eyes. Those of you who have seen a few customizing videos of mine before will probably know that I have made a habit of only using paint for face-ups, and that continued with the purple fairy. You also probably know that I am really awkward at this point of the video because I simply don't know what to say, and that also continued with the purple fairy. Once I was done with the eye whites, I moved on to working on their brows. Painting these faces takes me around 40 minutes to an hour, which I feel like is fairly good timing objectively, but when I'm editing, it feels like it takes so long for me to get done with just one step. It did feel really weird to be holding a whole doll rather than just a head, but I have to say, knowing that I wasn't going to have to make repairs later was a great feeling. Then I worked on the purple fairy's two-toned lips. I feel like by all means the eyes should be a more difficult part of a face-up, or even the eyebrows, but for some reason lips are really scary for me to paint. That being said, I don't think I did too bad. Speaking of eyes though, those were up next. I used a nail dotting tool to roughly block in the shape of the iris, then went back to my paintbrush to add details to the iris as well as the outline of the eye. I paint on the floor, so Reese came to say hi. And after managing to record almost no footage of me painting in real details, this is how their face turned out. Now we get into the really rough part. For the purple crystal fairy, I was absolutely determined to grow crystals on this doll. There are a lot of different methods to grow crystals, and I wanted to use two. One would be to use alum and boiling water to create the fairy's larger accent crystals, and then the second would be to use borax and boiling water to make the rest of their outfit, so to speak. I tried for ages and ages to grow alum crystals that were good enough. I started with just water to make the foundation, with the intention to then re-immerse the seed crystals in a water and alum mixture dyed with food coloring. I technically did manage to grow some crystals, but the shape and color were both off. Despite using blue and red food coloring, the crystals were distinctly gray. I know I'm not giving really good, detailed instructions here, and I do apologize. I'll have the document I use for instruction linked in the description below if you want to just grow crystals for fun, but the reason I'm not really getting into it is because the methods didn't work for my purposes. That's not to say they're bad methods, merely that they didn't adjust well to what I was trying to do. So I decided to give up on the alum crystals and start thinking about the borax ones. I got some purple watercolor ink to get a better color and mixed that with boiling water and borax. Just as a test to see if it worked, I put a pipe cleaner in, and lo and behold, crystals. Please ignore any continuity errors from here on out. I figured the best way to organize this video was in sections rather than following my efforts chronologically. Given my success with the pipe cleaner, I was emboldened to test the borax crystals on the fairy themselves. I used some fake crystal beads as the larger crystals, since the alum ones were a no-go, and attached them to the doll's leg with resin. I figured I would do one leg as a test, so that way if anything went wrong, I wouldn't have ruined the whole doll. Something I still managed to do, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. I sanded the leg a bit to hopefully aid the borax in gripping the plastic, and then used tape and cling film to try to protect the areas I didn't want covered. I was really nervous that the watercolor ink would dye the plastic. My protective measures promptly failed. Good news was the leg wasn't dyed. Bad news was the borax crystals sloughed right off. I figured the crystals needed something to adhere to and thought, why not pipe cleaners? I had already proven that the borax would stick to those nicely, so I went through and hot glued on more large accent crystal beads. The ones I attached with resin had popped clean off, so hot glue was going to be my friend. Then I began to also hot glue on pipe cleaners everywhere I wanted the crystals to cover. This is what they looked like with all the pipe cleaners glued down. Not cute, but I had hoped that the crystals would fill in the gaps and make for a clean finish. The only thing left to do was submerge them. Immediately upon removing the doll from their purple bath, I knew this had been a failure. I mean, you guys see the footage. They look terrible. The bath also somehow managed to get ink onto the fairy's face, which was disappointing to see, especially because I have no idea how it happened. I went ahead and scraped the crystals off of some of the doll's body where there wasn't pipe cleaner, frantically hoping for this to magically make a difference in the overall appearance. It didn't. So with a very, very heavy heart, I removed everything. Thankfully, hot glue isn't the strongest adhesive, so I was able to get rid of the pipe cleaners without undue damage to the doll. I tried wiping away the purple from their face with just water to no avail. I don't know what possessed me to try hand sanitizer, but that did technically work. You can't see very well in this footage, but it also unfortunately took away some of the blushing on the fairy's face. And this is where the video ends. As I said in the intro, part 2, I have started working on the purple fairy again, but at this point I was so upset that I just stopped all progress for a solid week. I went through everything, especially the crystallization process, fairly quickly here, but I was working on this doll for weeks by the time I hit this critical failure, and knowing I would have to try to rework their face, completely reconfigure how I made an outfit, and also create their wings, it was too much for me at that point. There really will be a redemption, I promise. I don't mean to be ending on a bad note, but as much as I wanted a fresh start for crafting this doll, hence the week-long break to clear my head, I also wanted a fresh start for their video. So while this is a solemn ending, it has a purpose. Editing this and reliving the emotions I was feeling was sad, but with this video we are putting the bad moments of the Purple Fairy's construction in the past and looking toward the future where they are finished and beautiful. I'll try not to make you guys wait too long for a part 2 to this video. Even though this was a bumpy one, I hope it was still fun to watch, and I hope it can serve as a reminder that art can be messy and upsetting, and that's okay. It happens to everyone sometimes, and you're not alone if you've been in the same spot I was in while filming this. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, or your night, or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!